BioOhio is really thrilled and honored to be included in the recently established Ohio Rare Disease Advisory Council. We're doing our part to ensure that we as Ohio improve access to treatments and tools such as biomarker testing. So we appreciate that opportunity and that platform to do some of that great work. As we get going today, there'll be a variety of speakers. As Scott mentioned, we'll be carving out some time at the end to answer some questions. Now I'd like to turn it over to Leo Almeida. He serves as the Ohio Government Relations Director for the American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network. Leo?
Thank you, Eddie, for that introduction, and thank you to BioOhio for hosting this forum today. The American Cancer Society Cancer Action Network, also known as ACS-CAN, is the nation's leading cancer advocacy organization. We are the American Cancer Society's public policy affiliate. We work in Congress, state legislators, and local jurisdictions to support evidence-based policy and legislative solutions designed to eliminate cancer as a major health problem. For 20 years, ACS-CAN has been empowering volunteers to be advocates for policies that influence change and impact the future of cancer. From gaining dramatic increases in funding for cancer research to ensuring all Americans have access to care, our work is saving lives and leading to new innovative breakthroughs in how to fight this disease. That is why we are proud to be one of the sponsors for today's event. Biomarker testing is an important tool in finding the best options for a cancer patient's treatment. To tell you more about biomarker testing, I'd like to introduce one of my colleagues, Devon Adams. Devon is a senior analyst for policy and legislative support at ACS-CAN. He works on policy related to cancer research, device and drug development, and clinical trials. Devon leads ACS-CAN's work to improve access to biomarker testing in cancer and expanding access to telehealth for people living with and beyond cancer. In addition to his ACS-CAN experience, Devon has practiced as a registered nurse in critical, emergency, and public health settings and has a BSN from the University of Louisiana Lafayette and an MPH in Health Policy and Management from the George Washington University. Devon, I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Leo. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. One second. Okay. Can everyone see the slides? Good to go?
I can see it.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you to BioOhio for allowing me to present today. As Leo mentioned, my name's Devon Adams, Senior Analyst for Policy and Legislative Support at ACS-CAN. And today I'm going to tell you about some important innovations in cancer diagnostics and treatment that are improving patient survival and quality of life. Let's start with some statistics. The American Cancer Society estimates that in 2021, there'll be almost 1.9 million new cancer cases diagnosed in the US, over 70,000 of these in Ohio. Additionally, ACS estimates that over 600,000 people in the US will die from cancer. But as a country, we've been making progress in the fight against cancer. For example, from 2017 to 2018, there's a 2.4% decline in the cancer death rate, a new record for the largest one-year drop. Some of this progress is due to new innovations in precision medicine. Biomarker testing can be thought of as the key to unlocking precision medicine. But first, what are biomarkers? They are the biological molecules found in blood, tissues, or other bodily fluids that can provide insight into normal or abnormal physiologic processes, medical conditions, or diseases. And they include, but are not limited to, gene mutations or protein expression.
I'll say that
while there are several different categories of biomarkers with different purposes, biomarkers are increasingly being utilized to inform providers if patients are likely going to respond to target therapy. This is what makes biomarker testing an essential component of precision medicine, connecting the right patient to the right treatment at the right time. Biomarker testing is the analysis of a patient's tissue, blood, or fluid biospecimen for the presence of a biomarker, and includes but isn't limited to single analyte tests, multiplex panel tests, and partial or whole genome sequencing. Biomarker testing in people with cancer looks for the presence of molecules like proteins or gene mutations found in cancer cells, and once identified can be used for the purposes of diagnosis, treatment, management, or ongoing monitoring. Cancer biomarkers are most often identified after a patient has received a tissue biopsy. However, there have been innovations in liquid biopsies that can detect biomarkers through a blood sample.
They do.
As an example, after a lung biopsy and biomarker testing of a patient's tumor, testing may indicate that the patient has EGFR positive non-small cell lung cancer. So what does this mean? In this instance, EGFR represents the biomarker. EGFR is a protein on the surface of some cells found and is responsible for cell growth. Some types of non-small cell lung cancer have an abnormally high levels of EGFR, which serves as a key factor driving tumor growth and progression. Today, there are several FDA-approved EGFR inhibitors that work by blocking EGFR and keeping cancer cells from growing. It's important to point out that biomarker testing in people with cancer is different than genetic testing for an inherited mutation or inherited cancer risk. While biomarker testing in cancer refers to the testing of malignant or cancerous tissue for certain characteristics that can inform care, genetic testing for an inherited mutation or inherited cancer risk refers to testing for mutations which make a person at higher risk for developing certain types of cancers. Oncology has been leading the way in precision medicine advancements, but the tailoring of biomarker treatment to specific biomarkers is being explored in other diseases and conditions, including in areas such as cardiology, rheumatology, and neurology. After biomarker testing, a patient may find that their cancer has biomarkers that are not well understood or lack a corresponding targeted therapy. However, they may find that their test results make them eligible for a clinical trial of an investigational targeted therapy. In fact, some biomarker testing reports will even note ongoing clinical trials for which a patient may be eligible for based on their cancer's biomarkers. Clinical trials give patients the opportunity to access the latest developments in treatment and access to care that is equivalent to treatment outside of a trial. And cancer clinical trials are increasingly driven by biomarkers and the development of targeted therapies. Biomarker testing can identify patients who are eligible for these trials. The number and percentage of cancer clinical trials that involve biomarkers has grown significantly, from 15% in 2000 to 55% in 2018. Since many cancer biomarkers can be found across cancer types, some clinical trials enroll patients who have different types of cancers, but all have the same biomarker. Successful trials have helped lead to nearly 80 oncology medications that have required or recommended biomarker testing, up from 20 in 2011. Several professional organizations and associations have cancer biomarker testing treatment guidelines, including the National Comprehensive Cancer Network and the American Society of Clinical Oncologists. These guidelines will specify when and if biomarker testing is appropriate for a cancer patient. Biomarker testing has become the standard of care for certain cancers because patients who receive biomarker testing and are eligible for and receive targeted therapy have better outcomes, including survival and quality of life. As illustrated here, several steps must occur before a patient can receive a targeted therapy, and barriers can arise at various points along the way. First, there must be reliable, valid, and relevant tests available on the market. Second, patients will often need a biopsy to obtain enough tissue for biomarker testing, or if appropriate, a liquid biopsy. Third, healthcare providers need to be aware of which tests to utilize and when, as well as how to utilize the results in caring for their patients. Fourth, insured coverage is an essential component for patient access. And finally, healthcare facilities need to be equipped with the appropriate testing infrastructure. Despite the benefits of biomarker testing as shown by improved patient outcomes from biomarker-driven therapies, testing is far from universal, and testing rates lag behind clinical guidelines. While there are several barriers limiting the use of biomarker testing in cancer, one key barrier is related to coverage for biomarker tests. Payer coverage plays a significant role in provider uptake and patient access to biomarker testing. However, coverage of tests differs greatly across the multiple public and private payers in the US healthcare system, and payers take different approaches in making their coverage decisions. Coverage policies are generally more common for single gene tests versus multi-panel gene tests. However, panel tests can often make a more efficient use of tissue samples compared to multiple single gene tests, and is recommended for certain cancers. Additional barriers can be characterized as provider or institutional level barriers, and this can include ensuring that there is adequate tissue for testing and challenges related to providers staying up to date with a rapidly changing field. Currently, not all individuals benefit equitably from biomarker testing and targeted therapy, and there are notable disparities across certain groups. For example, research has shown that patients who are Black, uninsured, or Medicaid insured are less likely to be tested for certain guideline-indicated biomarkers. Differential access can potentially widen already existing cancer disparities. Last year, ACSCAN fielded surveys as part of its Survivor Views cohort of over 3,000 cancer survivors. Some of the survey questions related to biomarkers, and some things that we found were that only 39% of respondents reported having their tumor tested for biomarkers. About 1 in 8 respondents indicated that testing was not covered by their insurer. 15% of respondents who received biomarker testing indicated that they had paid $500 or more out of pocket for their testing. And 25% of respondents were unsure if they had even been tested for biomarkers. As precision medicine shifts the way healthcare providers and patients think about cancer treatments, it's important that we identify and address barriers to biomarker testing. ACSCAN is working to improve access to testing by identifying and addressing these barriers so that all cancer patients have the opportunity to benefit. ACSCAN is working to educate lawmakers and policymakers about the importance of biomarker testing to cancer patients. And I'm happy to announce that we've had some recent success in the state of Illinois, which recently passed a law expanding coverage for biomarker testing in state-regulated health plans. You can see more of our work related to biomarkers at fightcancer.org/biomarkers. And with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Eddie.
Devon, thanks for that important background information. To make all this a little bit more real for everybody, I'm going to turn it over to one of our patient speakers, AJ Patel. AJ is a stage 4 lung cancer survivor and lives in California with his wife and 3 children. Aside from a full-time career, AJ is a fierce advocate for biomarker testing. His advocacy focuses on patients and for research. AJ, hand it over to you.
Thank you so much, Eddie, and hello, everybody. This is a very critical and very important topic, so I'm so appreciative of everybody participating, even though we're doing this by a video conference as opposed to being in person. So 8 years ago, in 2013, I was told I have stage 4 lung cancer, and my cancer has metastasized to my brain with significant tumors. I was told I probably have 6 months to live if I take no action. The only thing going through my head at the time was, but I've never smoked. How is this possible? I now realize that if you have lungs, you can get lung cancer. As you can imagine, I was devastated to hear I have cancer. Cancer is a thief. As soon as I heard those devastating words, the thief suddenly appeared and snatched my smile, and soon afterwards, my happiness and sleep. The thief left a feeling of destruction and despair throughout my body. The thief even stole the smiles from my family. The thief stole my prized possession, hope, and the possibility of seeing tomorrow. So today, I want to share something with you that is miraculous that happened to me. Something that has literally saved my life. Essentially, I was put in touch with two angels, a lung oncologist specializing in the 50 different shades of gray of lung cancer, and a patient. Not just a patient of cancer, but a patient of lung cancer. A person who is a spitting image of me, living with the stage 4 lung cancer disease for the past 4 years. You know how incredible that is? It gave me such a tremendous amount of hope. With the help of these angels, I realized that I really need to know the profile of my cancer and what is driving it and causing it to flourish within my body. I realized that there is a test called biomarker testing that can actually check a cancer's genomic profile to see what's driving it. In 2013, the test checked for around 110 biomarkers. Today, it is 6 times as many. It's incredible. If your cancer has a biomarker, there may be medicine your doctor can just prescribe that can attack the cancer, possibly eliminating the need for chemotherapy and radiation. My biomarker test was positive. So I was able to get treatment that specifically provides medicine that seeks out and destroys my cancer with far, far less side effects than chemotherapy. If I should have a reoccurrence, I can have another biomarker test to see if there is a new driver and possibly medicine that might help to achieve beating back the cancer with a new, perhaps, driver. In clinical trials, my medicine's effectiveness was supposed to be 18 to 24 months, and here I am, 8 years later. Still alive, having beaten the 6 months I was given back in 2013. As you can imagine, my love affair with my medicine continues to this day, and it is still working for me. Biomarker tests, which can now be performed through a blood draw, should be the standard of care. It can be done by a blood draw or a tissue biopsy, but it should be the standard of care for all cancers. Forget lung cancers. It should be performed after any reoccurrence as well. And it should be the first test that is ordered as soon as a diagnosis is confirmed. Even now, I still feel emotionally charged. You know, cancer treatment has evolved significantly. Be sure to request a comprehensive genomic profile or biomarker testing all the time. Every single patient, no one should be left behind. The test can literally save lives. It saved mine. Thank you so much for allowing me to present my story to everybody here today.
AJ, thank you for that powerful story and making it real for us all. I'd like to move now to one of the experts that's helping us discover the impact of biomarker testing. Dr. Reagan Mimette at Ohio State University is an oncologist specializing in lung cancer and has a presentation about the innovative work going on at Ohio State. Reagan?
Hi, thank you. It's very nice to be here today. Hold on a second. Let me try to share my screen. Are you seeing the PowerPoint?
Looks good.
Great. Well, thank you again for the nice introduction and for the opportunity to discuss with you today the importance of biomarkers in the selection of treatment for patients with lung cancer. I am an assistant professor here in the Division of Medical Oncology at The Ohio State University, the James, and I specialize in thoracic medical oncology. So first, I'd like to provide a brief background on what lung cancer is. It is the second most common malignancy, but the leading cause of cancer-related death worldwide. Unfortunately, most lung cancers are diagnosed at an advanced stage when they are not amenable to curative surgery or radiotherapy. Non-small cell lung cancer accounts for 80 to 85% of lung cancer cases, with the majority of those classified histologically as adenocarcinoma. An important innovation in just the last 1 to 2 decades in the treatment of advanced lung cancer is the development of drugs that target specific genetic mutations that drive tumor growth, these so-called driver mutations that you've heard the last 2 speakers mention. Interestingly, there was a study that was just published in the New England Journal of Medicine last year that showed in the last 1 to 2 decades, there's actually been a significant decrease in the mortality of patients that are diagnosed with lung cancer. And this is attributable, at least in part, to the advent of these targeted therapies. Genomic testing can identify mutations within a cancer cell's DNA that drive the growth of a specific person's lung cancer. And as you can see here in this figure, there's been about 14 different driver mutations that have been identified in lung adenocarcinoma. And although these mutations drive the tumor's growth, they are also the tumor's Achilles heel. And the National Comprehensive Cancer Network strongly recommends that at least 9 of these driver mutations be tested in patients with lung cancer. And the reason that these 9 specific driver mutations are strongly recommended is because drugs have been developed that target these 9 mutations. And both laboratory-based research as well as clinical trials have shown that they are effective in killing cancer cells. These drugs can also be given orally as a pill, which is very nice and convenient for our patients. And as mentioned by our previous speaker, they tend to have much fewer side effects than classic cytotoxic chemotherapy. Although these drugs are not curative in advanced lung cancer, many patients with targetable driver mutations are living years longer than prior to the development of these therapies. And to further illustrate the importance of doing genomic testing to identify these driver mutations, I'd like to share the story of one of my patients. So this gentleman was, he's a 48-year-old never smoker who presented to a community hospital with increasing shortness of breath for the past month. Unfortunately, imaging showed that he had a large mass in his right lung, causing collapse of that portion of the lung, as well as spots known as nodules in his adrenal glands and throughout his bones, which was concerning for metastatic disease. This right lung mass, as well as the adrenal nodule, were biopsied, and both were found to be lung adenocarcinoma. Because the cancer had spread from his lungs to other parts of his body, he was diagnosed with stage 4 or advanced lung cancer. He was started on a combination of chemotherapy and another type of treatment that's known as immunotherapy, which these drugs do not directly kill cancer cells, but they reprogram a person's own natural immune system to attack their cancer. And this was started by a medical oncologist out in the community. However, over the next couple of months, after he received a couple rounds of chemotherapy with immunotherapy, he did rather poorly, and he was in and out of the hospital multiple times to have fluid from his chest drained so that he could breathe a little bit more easily. He also had intractable pain related to his bone mets, which is the cancer that had spread to his bones, that ultimately required radiation to palliate his pain. Overall, his cancer just wasn't responding to this combination of chemotherapy and immunotherapy. And so understandably, the patient and his family were feeling pretty pessimistic about his prognosis. So they decided to come see us at Ohio State for a second opinion. And what we realized is that genetic testing had actually been done on his prior tumor biopsy, but the results of that testing were not being used to guide the treatment of his lung cancer. Specifically, his cancer was found to have a driver mutation in a gene known as ALK. And so we started him on a drug known as alectinib that can target cancers that have this driver mutation in the ALK gene. After only 2 months of treatment with alectinib, there was a dramatic and near complete resolution of his cancer. He has now been on alectinib for over 14 months, and we continue to have great control of his cancer. So there have been numerous clinical trials, as I mentioned, over the last 1 to 2 decades that have evaluated these drugs that target driver mutations such as alectinib. And these trials have shown that they are associated with improved clinical outcomes in lung cancer patients. Specifically, there was a phase 3 trial known as ALEX that evaluated the first generation ALK inhibitor, crizotinib, versus a second generation or newer generation ALK inhibitor, alectinib, in patients with advanced or stage 4 lung cancer harboring a mutation in ALK. And what this study showed was that something known as progression-free survival, which is the time from starting treatment in a lung cancer patient to the time that their cancer becomes resistant and starts growing again, it was about 3 years for the patients who were treated with this newer ALK inhibitor, alectinib. Now, this is actually quite impressive when you consider historically that in patients whose tumors harbored ALK mutations that were treated with classic cytotoxic chemotherapy, their progression-free survival was only 3 months. So using a targeted therapy in a patient whose cancer harbors a driver mutation resulted in a 10-fold increase in their progression-free survival. More importantly, the study also looked at something known as overall survival, which is the amount of time from when a patient is first diagnosed with their lung cancer to the time that the patient dies. And what they found is that even with the earlier generation drug, the ALK inhibitor crizotinib, this was associated with a median overall survival of about 5 years, which is actually rather good for a patient with advanced stage 4 lung cancer. And actually, the newer generation drug, alectinib, this study actually has not determined what the median overall survival will be of those patients with, treated with alectinib, because there are just so many patients that are still alive receiving this treatment. And that's a great problem to have with lung cancer research. Again, it's most impressive when you compare this historically with patients who would have had this ALK mutation in their lung cancer and would have been treated with cytotoxic classic chemotherapy. Their overall survival was less than 2 years. Another reason why it's important to do genetic testing to identify driver mutations in a person's lung cancer is that certain driver mutations are associated with actually a decreased response to other types of treatment. I briefly mentioned something known as immunotherapy. There are drugs called immune checkpoint inhibitors. Again, they don't directly kill the cancer cells, but they try to reprogram a person's own natural immune system to target and attack and kill the cancer. But what we found is that when we look at the use of immunotherapy in patients whose tumors harbor these driver mutations, that some driver mutations really don't have a good response to immunotherapy. Let's go back again to the example of patients whose tumors harbor a mutation in ALK. What the studies have shown is that 2/3 of the patients whose tumors harbor this mutation in ALK who are treated with the immune checkpoint inhibitors have progressive disease, meaning at no time from the start of that treatment was their cancer ever stable or shrank. It just kept growing. And about 1/3 of patients have been found that, okay, they'll have stable disease in response to immunotherapy, but that just means the cancer just didn't grow for a few months. It never actually shrunk. And when you look at the number of patients who had a partial response or partial shrinkage of their tumor, whose tumors harbored this ALK mutation, there weren't any. And there certainly weren't any patients who had what we call complete response, which is the disappearance of all signs of cancer on imaging studies. So again, there's been numerous clinical trials that show these drugs that target driver mutations are associated with improved clinical outcomes in lung cancer patients. And as I mentioned, these drugs are relatively well tolerated and they can be taken as a pill, which is really nice and convenient for our patients. They don't have to get a port placed. They don't have to come in for intravenous infusion of their chemotherapy. They can just take their treatment at home. So clearly this demonstrates that we really need to be identifying driver mutations in lung cancer patients' tumors. So how many patients who should be tested for driver mutations in their lung cancer are actually being tested? Well, this was investigated and the results of the study were presented recently at the American Society for Clinical Oncology, or ASCO, annual meeting. And it was a retrospective analysis that included almost 3,500 patients, all with metastatic or advanced lung cancer. And this was from data from practices all over the country within the US Oncology Network, and that includes here in Ohio. What they found was that although more than 90% of patients were at least being tested for one driver mutation in their lung cancer, when they looked at how many patients were being tested for at least 5 biomarkers, that was less than half of patients who should be tested. And again, this is just 5 biomarkers. Remember, I mentioned that the National Comprehensive Cancer Network strongly recommends testing for 9 driver mutations. So there is certainly room for improvement here. Another thing that this study showed was that although 90 or almost 90% of patients did get biomarker testing for at least one driver mutation, 10% of those patients actually weren't tested until after their cancer had progressed on so-called the first line of therapy, which was probably a combination of chemo and immunotherapy like my patient. And the issue with this is that these clinical trials looking at these targeted therapies have shown if you really want to get the best clinical outcome for your patients, you need to use the best drug first. So you need to start with the targeted therapy to really achieve these great clinical outcomes. So you shouldn't be testing after their cancer's progressed. So what are some of the possible barriers? And I know we discussed that previously in this forum, but I'm going to go over a couple of them again. What are the possible barriers for biomarker testing, specifically in lung cancer, and are there solutions? So one possible barrier is that there's actually a deficit in the physician, the treating medical oncologist's knowledge regarding which biomarkers, that is, which driver mutations should be tested for, and again, when they should be tested. So the answer is they need to be tested up front before you start the patient on any type of treatment if you really want to get the best clinical outcome. Interestingly, there was another study that was just presented at the World Conference on Lung Cancer last month that showed that there's higher rates of testing for these biomarkers, for these driver mutations in academia versus out in the community. Another barrier that's been mentioned for doing biomarker testing for driver mutations is inadequate tumor material from the biopsy to do genetic testing. And you really don't want to have to put your patient through another invasive procedure to get the tissue. Usually requires them to go under anesthesia. Fortunately, we've recently discovered that cancer actually sheds its DNA into a patient's circulating blood. And so doing genetic testing for a driver mutation may become as simple as just doing a standard routine laboratory blood draw. Another possible barrier is variability insurance coverage and reimbursement for testing. This may also depend on the test. So insurance might be willing to cover testing for 1 or 2 of the driver mutations. But again, the National Comprehensive Cancer Network strongly recommends testing for 9 mutations. So we really need to get insurance covering, being willing to cover for a more comprehensive panel. To try to improve the rates of testing, the Longevity Foundation is providing patients with free information online about biomarker testing through their No One Missed campaign. And this is the link to their website. They're hoping that this will empower patients to talk to their medical oncologists and say, I was reading, about the importance of biomarker testing in lung cancer. Should my lung cancer be tested? And the next phase of this campaign will actually be to directly provide resources to the physicians themselves. I'd like to give a special thank you to the Division of Molecular Pathology here at The Ohio State University James Comprehensive Cancer Center, which is led by Dr. Dan Jones. This division ensures that all of our lung cancer patients who should be tested for driver mutations are tested. And I'd also like to give a thanks to BioOhio, the American Cancer Society, Genentech, Pfizer, and Amgen for this opportunity to discuss with you today the importance of testing for driver mutations in lung cancer. Thank you.
Dr. Mimette, thank you for the little bit of insight into the great work that you're doing. I think Ohio is lucky to have you doing the research in this space and lucky for the care that you're providing Ohioans. So thank you for that. We're now going to move on to Mrs. Susan Wagner. Susan is a 72-year-old retired elementary school teacher living in Cleveland, Ohio. 6 years ago, at age 66, Susan was experiencing pain in her back and side, and her primary care physician scheduled her for gallbladder removal surgery. During the pre-op check-ins, a tumor was discovered in her lungs. Through biomarker testing, it was confirmed she had the EGFR mutation, and this completely changed the recommended treatment and saved her painful intravenous chemo treatments, recovery time, and cost associated with the chemo. Susan, I'm handed over to you to tell us a little bit more about your story.
Thank you so much, Eddie, and thanks for the introduction and the opportunity to speak today. As Eddie said, my name is Susan Gray Wagner. I am a retired elementary school educator living in Lakewood, a first-ring suburb of Cleveland, Ohio, where I have resided for the last 49 years. 6 years ago, when I was 66, I was experiencing pain, as he said, in my back and side, and my primary care physician did schedule me for gallbladder removal surgery. During the pre-op check-in, multiple small tumors were discovered in my lungs. I had never smoked and always lived an active lifestyle, so when I was diagnosed with stage 4 non-small cell lung cancer and initially told that I had about 12 to 18 months left to live, it was extremely shocking for my family and for me. I saw several medical opinions to confirm the diagnosis. Fortunately, my Cleveland Clinic oncologist, Dr. Hamid Dow, was very in tune with biomarker testing, and he suggested right away that we consider a biopsy and blood test to confirm whether the cancer cells had a specific mutation. The tests came back and confirmed my cancer cells have the EGFR mutation for which a targeted drug was available. So we were thrilled to learn that intravenous chemotherapy would not be the first line of treatment for my cancer. I began the targeted oral cancer therapy right away. The initial drug was projected to work on average for about 10 months in effectiveness in shrinking the tumors, but it worked much longer, about 33 months, and when it stopped working, another targeted therapy had been approved by the FDA, so I began taking that drug. While taking these oral targeted therapy pills for the last 6 years, I've been able to maintain normal and active quality of life with my husband, my children, and my 5 grandchildren, and I definitely appreciate every single day. However, just last week, my scans revealed that the cancer has progressed in my hip bones and spine. Last Friday, Dr. Dow had my blood drawn to test my cancer DNA. The tests will do genomic sequencing to see if a particular mutation can be found, exon 20, for which the FDA just approved another targeted therapy 2 weeks ago that I could take. They find this mutation, though, 20% of the time. They do not find it 80% of the time. If the blood test does not find enough DNA to determine if I have the mutation, they will do a bone biopsy through my hip or back. This is a little more difficult because they have to decalcify the biopsy. If they do not find the exon 20 mutation, I will have to begin chemotherapy. Once again, we are hopeful that the biomarker testing will provide results that enable me to continue living a good quality of life. Thank you for this opportunity to share my story. And I just want to add that listening to the doctor, now I know to ask for genetic testing for the whole panel for 9 biomarkers. So I really, really appreciate this information. Thank you.
Susan, we appreciate your comments. We'll move over now to BrandiLee Sawyer. Brandi is the Director of Patient Advocacy at the Shepherd Foundation. BrandiLee.
Thank you so much, Eddie. And thank you all so much for allowing me to be here and to speak. Sorry, something almost fell off my desk. And I'm incredibly humbled, as always, when I share my son's story. I'm just humbled that that his legacy can continue to live on and that his journey was not in vain. And I'm always so appreciative to anyone that will listen and learn from the gaps in the system, which include biomarker testing and genomic medicine. I do have a slide, and I was going to share my screen. I don't share my screen very often, so here we go. I think it's, thanks for bearing with me. You guys can see that, right? Eddie, maybe you can answer. You can see it, right? Okay,
It's
awesome.
up.
Thank you, guys. So this is my youngest sweet boy, Finn Sawyer. He was shortly after my family moved to Nashville a little over 5 years ago in 2016. He was diagnosed with a rare cancer that can present in children and adults called Rhabdomyosarcoma. Finn, after many medical issues, some chronic and periodic pain, it would kind of come and go. And when it was really painful for him, he was having trouble going to the bathroom, and we couldn't figure out what was going on. It was discovered just 2 months after we moved here that he had a small, well, actually a pretty large tumor, but small bladder. He had a small bladder, and the tumor had kind of taken over his bladder. I'm actually, sorry, I'm trying to switch to the next slide, and it won't actually go. Sorry, guys. Maybe I'll just try this. Yeah, Finn was 20 months old at diagnosis, and we were told that there was this object in his bladder, this mass, and they didn't know what it was. And he was eventually, after a couple days of ultrasound and a biopsy, we were told that he was diagnosed with embryonal rhabdomyosarcoma of the bladder and prostate. So it's different than bladder cancer or prostate cancer. Rhabdomyosarcoma is a cancer all on its own, and it's a very aggressive form of cancer. So we had gone from just periodic pain to then more chronic pain, and then to a bulge in his abdomen within 2 months. And we embarked on a journey. We were told that they identified what the cancer was, and we embarked on a 43-week chemo protocol of very intense chemotherapies. And he also had to receive 28 days of radiation in the middle of that chemo regimen, and it kind of overlapped with Thanksgiving and Christmas. And then at the end of that treatment, we were told that we were just hoping for the best and that we would have to wait and see if it came back. We were told in the beginning that he actually had an 80% chance of responding favorably to treatment. And I want to take a second to address, like, when you or your child or your loved one is diagnosed with cancer, I'm sure many of you can attest to this. You don't know which direction is up. You're frantically scrambling, trying to figure out what you're up against. And especially when it's your child, you're trying to care for that child. And if you have other children, as well as maintain some sort of, mental health. So you don't know what you don't know. And I did not know about biomarker testing. I didn't know about genomic testing. I will, sorry about the muting. So my husband and I at the time, we had no idea what to look for or what to advocate for. So when Finn's tumor, the original tumor, started growing again after that initial intense treatment, we were sort of at a loss. I mean, 80% sounded great to us in the beginning, but we really had no idea that had we had some biomarker testing in the beginning to figure out what mutations were in his cancer, what was driving his cancer, we would have known that frontline therapy was not going to work. And that is why I advocate every single day, and I connect with families and I tell them we have to take a precision medicine approach. It is so, so critical. Finn went on to endure 2 more relapses. He was an amazing kid. He endured so much. He had 9 different harsh chemotherapies over the course of the 2.5 years that he battled cancer. He had, it was 28 days plus another week of cumulative radiation. When Finn relapsed the second time, we actually went to Mayo in Minnesota, and they offered us hope there. He had a major surgery there to remove this second relapse tumor, which you can see in that middle slide at the top. They do some 3D modeling, and that green thing is the tumor that grew after his second chemo regimen for relapse. And what I know now is that when he relapsed, they sent his biopsy off for genetic testing, but we didn't wait to start a chemo protocol because we couldn't, because it was so aggressive. And so one of the other issues is that the precision medicine approach, like, we need to have these companies that do this biomarker testing, this genomic medicine, we need them to turn the tests over much more quickly so that these vulnerable patients and patients with very aggressive cancers can actually get the results, know how to tailor their treatment if there is something possible, and then be able to start a protocol as soon as possible. But we're not set up to do that, at least not from what I've seen in the pediatric cancer world. So when we were at Mayo, he had major surgery. And as you can see, cancer treatment, for those of you that have witnessed it closely or even from a distance, it's pretty brutal. It can be really barbaric. We have to cut organs out. We have to cut limbs off. We need this personalized medicine approach up front at the time of diagnosis, so that we're not putting our patients through this. So we're not putting, patients through toxic chemotherapies that aren't going to do anything for them. And I know I come as a plea from a bereaved mother, but I appreciated what Devon said earlier, that our medical oncology system and our science and research system is changing. And I think more and more people are on board with this personalized medicine approach, and more doctors are seeing how critical biomarker testing is. And I always want to encourage families and patients to share your story with the doctors, ask for this medicine approach, because you never know when it will make a difference. And many times like Dr. Memmott was saying, it can truly make a difference in someone's treatment protocol. I don't like to, I guess, go through the whole story all at once because it's pretty heavy. But Finn, as I was saying earlier, he battled for 2.5 years. He was never considered in remission. He was never considered NED or no evidence of disease. He went relapse after relapse, chemo regimen after chemo regimen, major surgery after major surgery. And there was a lot of negligence in not getting this genomic testing done up front so that we knew how to possibly tailor his treatment. He only had it done when we were at Mayo for his 3rd relapse. He had comprehensive biomarker testing, or really it was like full genome sequencing, which is rare to be done, but it was in Finn's desperate, in our desperate attempt to save his life as a last resort. But they identified a couple drugs that could potentially save his life, but unfortunately it was too little too late. His sweet little body was already really tired. He relapsed for the 3rd time at the end of September of 2018. And he went home on hospice after we attempted surgery at Mayo at the end of October. And he was home on hospice for a little over a month, and he died just before his fourth birthday on December 2nd. I vowed to Finn and to my other 2 boys and to all the patients battling cancer that don't have successful treatment protocols or no protocols at all, that I would make a difference. That after going through this with Finn, I learned the gaps in the system and the desperate need for this personalized medicine approach in this country for every single patient. So I have been fortunate enough to work with the foundation that I work at, as well as G2G, and advocate on behalf of Finn and other patients all around the world for this type of approach in the medical oncology system. And I'm not going to stop until every patient is able to have access to precision medicine at the time of diagnosis. I want to thank you guys for your time. And I don't say all of this as a plea or as sympathy, but I know it's hard because I'm super emotionally charged about this, but I just want everyone to know that their voice is incredibly, incredibly valuable and important. And we all have a role to play in advocating for this, for biomarker testing, because it can save lives. And so with that, I'll end there. And I just want to thank you again for allowing me to share. And hopefully I can stop sharing my screen too. Thank you, guys.
BrandiLee, thank you so much for your story, and know that everyone on this call will continue to be thinking about you and Finn, and don't usually get emotional, but thank you for your courage to continue to tell that story, and continue the fight that you have in this space. So we're getting close to 2 o'clock here. If I can pull myself together. Thank you to our guest speakers, Devon Adams, the American Cancer Society, Dr. Reagan Memmott over at the James at Ohio State. Thank you so much for our patient speakers who are the inspiration behind today's event. AJ Patel, Susan Wagner, and BrandiLee Sawyer with Finn. And thank you to our partners, without whom this event would not have been possible. Genentech, Pfizer, Amgen, the American Cancer Society, Cancer Action Network, G2G Consulting, and most importantly, all of you for learning and listening today. I know we have public policy makers and public policy influencers on the call that will be important in carrying out this advocacy. BioOhio and everyone here today are here to help you. We are a resource to answer any questions about what biomarker testing is, how it can help save lives, and what you can do to ensure biomarker testing is available to all Ohioans. It's a real honor to represent an industry that is healing people and saving lives. So count on BioOhio to do our part to advance the interests of this industry that wants to be helpful. So I appreciate everyone's time today. I think we might have a minute for one or two questions. So if there are any, please either enter them into the chat or feel free to unmute and ask. I think we can probably take two. Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question. This is Jeff Bernstein.
Go ahead, Jeff.
And I just was trying to get a grasp on how we could get the insurance, the medical insurance companies to understand that they have to be able to pay for these types of biomarker analysis for like more than example you gave us 9 specific biomarkers that need to be done for a patient. So what are the ways in which we can influence those decision makers in those companies to change it around?
Devon, you might be in the best position to address that.
I think it really starts with education. You know, a lot of, what we're seeing with biomarker testing and the science is so rapidly evolving. I think that the first step is just we need to educate lawmakers, we need to educate the public, how life-saving and the remarkable results of this treatment, longer lives, better quality of life. I think really that education piece is really one of the most important factors that we can, as advocates can continue to speak on over and over again to really make, folks, understand how important, this testing is for patients.
Yeah, I guess the other part of it, the question too, is that like in Europe, for example, is comprehensive biomarker testing, is that the norm? I mean, there you don't have this privatized insurance scenario. So I was wondering if that's like in the UK or any of the European countries, would that be something that is done routinely with people who have cancer?
Can I speak on that? That's an excellent question. And I, as an advocate, have personal experience on this because I advocate all over the world. Unfortunately, Europe is 100 years behind the USA, unfortunately. I recently was helping and advocating for a patient who had colon cancer, and I spoke to the oncology team, and when I said biomarker testing, and they said, "What's that?" They had no idea. I've spoken to people in the Far East, and they don't know what biomarker testing is. So it's spreading from the USA to across the world or across the countries. So it is something that we are pushing from an advocacy standpoint very hard. For example, in California, longevity is on the forefront of going to the legislators and making biomarker testing a scenario where pre-authorization is not required for it, because that adds time and delays to a patient's status as to the appropriate treatment that they need. And for insurance companies, I think that's another excellent question, and it's a passion of mine, because insurance carriers are looking at their bottom lines, but the cost of chemotherapy and radiation hospitalization far exceeds the cost of biomarker testing, finding the right treatment protocol for the patient. And it's really all about having comprehensive biomarker testing, not just 9 biomarkers. There are a lot of biomarkers, and it's costly, I get it. But as the companies that are involved in doing these wide range of tests, and there are only a few right now that are doing an incredibly powerful job, they make a difference, because when you cast a wide net in the ocean, you're going to get the best number of fishes that you're going for. So biomarker testing should not be limited. It absolutely saves lives. Even if you don't find a positive biomarker test, insurance companies need to be educated that informs the medical professionals of possibly alternatives to treatment that are appropriate, as opposed to just, we heard a story about someone who was given a biomarker test, but still was put on chemotherapy and radiation. That's the wrong protocol when you have a positive biomarker for something. If you don't have a positive biomarker, that's okay. It still informs the medical professionals on alternative treatments like immunotherapies. So insurance companies definitely need to be educated. It's a big issue because they are not on board. If the oncology world in the entire world is behind and lagging on the knowledge of biomarker testing and still stuck in the old days of radiation and chemotherapy, that everybody's doing an injustice to the industry. If you're going to be a medical professional, know your trade, know biomarker testing, know how to save and work for the patient. If you're going to be an insurance carrier, it's not always about the bottom line. You have a fiduciary and an ethical responsibility to the community of people who pay your premiums. And if they don't pay your premiums and they're provided by state or some other funded insurance providers, that's fine. They still have a duty to do the best thing for their clienteles. So those are my thoughts about the excellent questions you raised, Jeffrey.
Thank you very much, I appreciate it.
Thanks for that. We'll make this the last question, please. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Suzanne Brady-Kelney from Case Western Reserve University. I have a cancer research lab there. And in the context of BioOhio, I wanted to make this comment that there's a really important role that the commercial sector can play in this process. And that is that, we're waiting on medical professionals and the insurance companies to allow this testing. But if individuals who are able to research their cancer so well and those of their loved ones were able to commercially obtain tests, you wouldn't be stuck just waiting for the system to help you out. And I think there's an important role that could be played there, where, for next gen sequencing of your whole genome, it's less than $1,000. There are many people that would gladly pay those costs because of the tremendous burden that's put on them by having these diseases. And the insurance companies will eventually follow if people are doing this on their own. And so I know that there are companies like Human Longevity Incorporated in California that are able to do some testings, but we need to make this more broadly available to people. And we have tremendous research capabilities in the state of Ohio that could easily do any of these types of tests. And I think there needs to be forward thinking about what BrandiLee so eloquently described, which is that standard of care is terrible, right? It's hugely damaging. And you shouldn't have to put patients through that if there are alternatives, even if we have to go around getting that information ourselves somehow. And it's just a food for thought of how Ohio can move ahead of other states in providing some of these things.
Susan, thanks for that. We'll have to follow up on how we include that in our advocacy efforts in a more intentional way. I appreciate everyone's attendance today, and please drop us a note if you have any specific follow-up or ideas for us on how to continue to advance this work. Enjoy your weekends, and thanks for tuning in.